Hello everybody, look at what I got in front of me today. This is the Steam Deck. I've been using it quite frequently. In fact, I recently took it on a trip with me and was able to test it out pretty thoroughly. In this video, we're going to try to answer one question. Is the Steam Deck good for fighting games? First, I want to talk about the build quality of this thing. As you can see, it looks very similar to something like a Nintendo Switch, but this guy is a little bit longer and quite a bit heavier actually. In fact, the weight is pretty heavy where it's uncomfortable for you to hold it with two hands like this and then not have anything supported for a long period of time. So if you're planning to lay in bed and then kind of just play it in bed like this, you're not going to be able to play for very long because it's just so heavy. But on the flip side, because of its weight, it just feels really high quality, right? It feels like a brick, really. It's really solidly built, right? There's no flexing or anything like that. Just a solid piece of equipment. And I love the fact that the handle is rounded at the corner here. It makes it really comfortable for you to hold it and get a really good grip. Let's talk about the buttons. The face buttons and the D-pad, as you can see, is placed all the way up here, as opposed to maybe perhaps down here or something. This area is taken up by these two trackpads, and right above it, you got the two joysticks. So these two areas I would say are probably the best places to put your inputs, but since they are taken up by these guys, the D-pad and the face button get pushed all the way up here. As you can see, I have pretty long fingers and I find it pretty uncomfortable to use the D-pad and the face button this way. As you can see, my thumb is in a really awkward position where it's very straight versus, if I use the thumbsticks or this guy, it's a little more natural. If my thumb is positioned this way, there's not much of a bend at the wrist. You see that? But since the D-pad and the face buttons are all the way up here, this creates this unnatural bend of the wrist, making it really uncomfortable to use for long periods of time. You can get used to the face buttons over time because they're individual buttons, but with the D-pad, you're gonna have a hard time hitting up or up back because it's just so far. To do up back, of course, I have to lift up my palm here to hit these two buttons at the same time. And of course, when you do this, you lose the grip of the controller. And despite my long ass thumb, I can't quite reach up back comfortably. The position of this D-pad is pretty bad. They really should have moved this thing about half an inch down. And the same applies for up forward as well. I can't hit it consistently. So usually when I try to do up forward like this, because the D-pad is so far up, my thumb tends to only hit forward and resulting in him just doing this, which is what I don't want. And to make the problem worse, the D-pad has pretty big gaps in between the buttons. That makes it really difficult for you to press two buttons at once. In terms of feel, the D-pad and also the face buttons as well, they are pretty mushy and pretty heavy. This D-pad is pretty bad for diagonals in fighting games. You're not going to be accurate. Can you get better at it over time? Yes, but it's not going to be 100%. Now the joysticks look really nice. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's got these grooves around the sticks. However, there's a problem because the surface here is flat. So when you press down, your thumb is gonna just slip off. There's nothing to hold on to. So this surface here really needs to be concaved. So that way your thumb can grip the surface and it won't move around. And in terms of tension, I would say the tension is about the same as like a PS5 controller. It's a little heavier than the Xbox tension. Now let's move on to the shoulder buttons. The trigger is really nice. They kind of remind me of the PS5 trigger. Now the shoulder buttons, however, is really bad. And the reason why this is really bad is because you can see it's tapered off, right? To make it fit in this curve. If you try to use the inside of the knuckle of your index finger to hit this button, it's gonna be blocked by this little curve right here. And there's not much button here at all. So you're gonna actually need to lift up your finger and then go up here. And even here, you see how it's kind of blocked off, right? So it's very difficult to hit the shoulder buttons. Moving on to the back, you're gonna have 4 additional buttons and you can program this to anything you want. I've got mine programmed to down so that I can do the backdash really quickly. And I think it's super cool that it's included with the Steam Deck. However, I've got a gripe with this. So this is how you would be holding it. And so you're gonna use these 2 fingers to press this side of the button. However, this side of the button is hella hard to press in. Okay, I feel like there is an anchor there or something. But if you move away from this edge and press on the opposite side, it's so much easier to do. I don't understand why they designed it like that. Shouldn't this be the anchor over here? And this part should be loose so that it'll be easier to press. So what I learned is just to press toward the middle, right? Stay away from the inner edge right here. So that's a little tip for you. All right, let's talk about these trackpads here. I like them a lot. So initially, they're very sensitive. But the good news is you can adjust the sensitivity on these. And these guys have haptic feedback built into them. So just imagine if you're using like a MacBook trackpad. However, Valve's implementation of it is to mimic a trackball. So when you roll it, it'll just keep rolling for a little bit. You see that? And because of the haptic feedback, it really does feel like a trackball. It's kind of cool. Of course, Valve built these guys in here for games like this, or mouse-heavy games. But to be honest with you, I wish that Valve didn't include these. As much as I like them, I wish they had just repositioned the joysticks, the face buttons, and the D-pad to better places. I think using the joystick should be efficient enough to play games like this. Fighting games is all about precise controls. And the Steam Deck unfortunately don't have the best controls for them. However, all is not lost thanks to this magical plug right here. So this is a USB-C plug. So what you can do here is plug a controller in there. And if you have one of these guys, this is a USB-C hub. What you can do is plug it in. And you can plug a controller into the USB-C hub, and voila! Check this out. How cool is that? So the controller problem is solved. And honestly, this is probably the best way to play fighting games on the Steam Deck. You're gonna have precise control, and you're not going to have to deal with the weight of the Steam Deck itself. So this is probably the most ergonomic way to use the Steam Deck in my opinion. But wait, that's not all. Since Steam Deck doesn't have any Ethernet on it, so you're going to have to use Wi-Fi to play fighting games. And we know that's just all bad news, right? I'll tell you what, on the same hub, if you have an Ethernet port and an Ethernet cable, plug it in and you're going to be wired. I've tested it and it works. It's going to turn from a Wi-Fi logo to that logo right there. You're going to have a time of your life. Or at least I have a time of my life. And honestly, this is incredible. Just think about this for a second. You have something that's totally portable, but it will act like a little console where you can play your PC games on it with a controller, right? Whatever controller you want. And you can also have a wired connection. I mean, how amazing is that? So to answer the initial question, is the Steam Deck good for fighting games? Well, not right out of the box. And if you have one of these USB-C hubs, make sure you have an Ethernet cable plug. And if you have all of that, then the answer is yes, it's absolutely good for fighting games. As cool as this thing is, I want to set some realistic expectations for you. If you look at the specs, a Zen 2 CPU, and it's got an RDNA 2 GPU that's capable of 1.6 teraflops. Now that looks like it's a lot of power. And Valve even claimed that it's going to be able to deliver more than enough performance to run the latest AAA games. But in reality, unfortunately, this thing is pretty underpowered compared to your dedicated PC or laptop. And if you know anything about computers, there is no way that this tiny little thing can draw that kind of power to run these full-fledged AAA PC games. With DOA 6 right here, which is a couple of years old, and at 1080p, you can see the game is very slow. See that? Oh my goodness, this is not playable. I'm getting anywhere between 35 to 38 frames per second here. This is just unplayable. I mean, how do you play like this? Yeah, not gonna happen. So don't let the marketing fool you. This thing is not a powerhouse. To make it semi-playable, I have to turn the resolution down to 720p, and I gotta turn all the graphical effects to either low or off. So the game is a lot smoother now, but it's still pretty sluggish in my opinion. Even though it says that it's running at 60 frames per second now, it just feels slow. It doesn't feel snappy. I'm not sure if it's the CPU thing. Maybe this thing has a weak CPU. If you do decide to purchase a Steam Deck, make sure your expectations are realistic. Don't expect to play your games at max settings on everything. You're gonna have to turn them down. I want to talk about the screen itself for a little bit. It's a 1280 by 800 resolution, and this is an IPS display. It's got a refresh rate of 60 Hz. So a couple of things here. The resolution is pretty low, but I think that's okay, because most of the game you're going to be playing on this guy should be set to 720p. Just below the resolution of the screen. If you're playing anything higher than that, you're going to be wasting the performance of this machine. And also, this thing is 60 Hz. 60 Hz is pretty standard. However, I feel like this should be at least 120. 60 Hz is very low, especially for PC games. And yes, indeed, this guy is a touchscreen. You can see here. The way it is right now, it's not very responsive. It's pretty sluggish. And sometimes it gets buggy. It's not like your smartphone, right? So most of the time I find it better just to navigate the menus using the buttons. The Steam Deck comes pre-installed with SteamOS and is based on a Linux distribution. So this is not Windows. However, you can play Windows games on it. So here's my library. Many of these games are sorted as not compatible. So for example, Street Fighter V here, you see there's a little cross here, meaning that Steam say that it's not compatible. However, I installed it anyways, and it freaking works. Look at this, even though it said it's not compatible. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe parts of the game doesn't work well, I don't know. I've tried numerous of titles that said that it's not compatible with the Steam Deck, but all of them worked. So I don't know what to tell you. I guess your mileage may vary, but just think about it for a second. How is that possible that you can play all these Windows games on a Linux machine? Well, I dug into this and did some research. Valve developed something called Proton, which is a tool to allow Windows games to run on Linux. And it uses something called Wine to facilitate this. So if you know better than me, is this like an emulator or something for Linux? But regardless, it's amazing, it's cool. You don't need Windows to play all of your Windows games on here. Now, speaking of Windows, should you install Windows on this? I decided not to install Windows on this because I've read that it may break some functionalities that are essential to the Steam Deck. So maybe the headphone doesn't work, or some of these extra buttons may not work. The Steam Deck as is right now works really well with all of my Windows games, so unless you want to play emulators or things like that, there's really no need to install Windows on this guy at a risk of losing functionality for the machine. So here's my final thoughts. Despite all of the flaws, despite this thing being underpowered, I still love this thing. I love the fact that this thing exists at all. You gotta remember, this thing plays PC games, and you know how taxing PC games are. And to be able to play them on the go, it's just mind-blowing to me. I mean, how cool is it that I can bring DOA 6, Street Fighter 5, Soul Calibur, or Tekken and play them on the road? I mean, that's just super cool. And if you have one of these, you can turn this guy into a full-fledged PC. Could this thing be better? Absolutely. And that goes for everything really. I feel that's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask to me is there anything better than the Steam Deck to play your PC games on the go? And the answer is no. This is the best portable device to play your PC games, bar none. And that fact alone is why I love this guy. Alright, that's gonna be it for me. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like, subscribe for more, and take care now.